Hello and welcome to the lecturette entitled Marketplace 2025. What can you expect to see in the global marketplace? If you're a younger graduate student just starting your career, or a middle-aged grad student, or even someone like myself approaching the end of your career, how do you prepare for so much uncertainty and complexity in the world where we work and live? How do we prepare for a VUCA world? I recorded this lecture at the end of March 2025, whenever there's so much uncertainty about inflation, wars around the world. We still have a war going on between Russia and Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Gaza, with the Israelis and Hamas, and with the Houthis in Yemen. Just around the world, there's so much volatility right now. And at home here, we're worried about the impacts of inflation, unemployment. For example, if you're looking to buy a vehicle right now, you might be concerned about the pending threats of tariffs on foreign car parts and automobiles coming into the United States. What impact will they already vehicles, the average vehicle in America costs around $48,000. What would be the impact of these tariffs on auto parts and automobiles rolling into the United States? What inflationary effects will they have? Lots to think about at this time. What is VUCA? How does it impact us? VUCA is a term that came out of the military sciences. It explained, or it gave sort of a context for when military groups, whether it be Marines, Navy, are thinking about anticipating a conflict. How do they prepare for it? If you think about warfare, you're going to have vulnerability, so therefore you're going to have volatility, you have uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. So it came out of military science in terms of the context of war, whether you're fighting in a desert like the Middle East or in the mountains somewhere. VUCA explains sort of the complex environment of warfare. However, it became extended into corporate life about 11 years ago. The Harvard Business Review made the concept very popular. They talked about the acronym. They wrote an article about VUCA and how to deal with the VUCA world: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We have moved gradually over time, from a world that was once static and simple to one that's dynamic and complex. Let me give you a few examples. If you look at the oldest society we had in America, the agrarian society, it was rather static and simple. I'm not saying farmers do not work hard. They certainly work hard today. I would not be a good farmer because I'd be too lazy. But the farming was rather predictable. Now, obviously, the weather, summer's too hot, too much rain, not enough rain, they were changing conditions. But the act of farming itself, the science of farming, was static and simple. Plant your crops in the spring, harvest them late summer, prepare for winter, start all over again. It was a static and simple pattern of events from year to year. Even the earliest form of the Industrial Revolution, whether it be shipbuilding, building railroads, steel plants, and even Model T cars 100 years ago under Henry Ford and his son. From 1908 to 1928, Henry and his son produced 15 million Model T cars off an assembly line system. Now, obviously, there was much more complexity built into such a system. But once it was established, the pattern of producing cars, the process of producing cars, was rather static and simple. It didn't change much over that period of time. So it was a static and simple. Even the Industrial Revolution had predictable elements to it, making it static and simple. However, now we're in a post-industrial world with AI and so forth. It's definitely moving into a dynamic and complex world. Oh, one more example of a static and simple economy. When I moved into higher education in 1980, the environment of higher education hadn't changed much in a couple hundred years. It was pretty much teaching in a classroom with a chalkboard, chalk and talk, handing out papers, tests were done on paper, people submitted research papers. Hadn't changed a whole lot. Even teaching accounting. St. Francis taught accounting to Charles Schwab, the great steel industrialist, in 1878. Back then, they called it the accounting, instead of accounting, they called it accounts. He studied accounts. And the debits and credits were the same in 1878 as they are today. So even early higher education, even when I entered it in 1980, was rather static and simple. Since then, with the internet and online learning, it's become dynamic and complex. So there's a lot of industries that had very predictable patterns for long periods of time. Yes, there was subtle change, but not dynamic change, not sudden change like there has been in many of our industries today. So if you look at your own industry, is it static and simple? I bet it's dynamic and complex. The best exhibit I have of VUCA is the pandemic. It's a real life case of living VUCA. Never did I predict 5 years ago that I would leave my classroom, leave my office at St. Francis, work from home in teaching. Students would be sent home, and I never imagined there'd be a virus that was affecting the whole world. The Spanish flu was 100 years earlier. Obviously, we had the Black Plague in London in the 1600s. I never thought there'd be anything like the Black Plague coming back. I thought modern science would never let that happen. But we were definitely volatile in that period of time. Uncertainty, I don't know if we'd ever get over that. Complex and it was an ambiguous time. As I remember, I probably golfed more outside during the summer of 2020 just to get with my friends, because it was the way to escape being closed in. And the effects of being isolated that period of time is still affecting our children, teens, and many even adults today. It was a VUCA event. This is a good illustration of the accelerated rate of adoption and market growth for key products, and the time it took each of these product innovations to reach the first 50 million users. If you go back 100 years ago, the hottest company in America, sort of the Apple of its day, was Radio Corporation of America, RCA Corp. The radio was invented. The radio was a hot product in the 1920s. KDK was the first radio station out of Pittsburgh. And it took radio 38 years to reach its first 50 million listeners. I remember RCA had a CEO, David Sarnoff, and he believed that in the vision of a radio with a picture in it someday. And he put a lot of money in research and development for the next big product innovation, entertainment, and communication, which was the television. But it took radio 38 years to reach the first 50 million user mark. Television was developed by David Sarnoff and others. The Great Depression and World War II definitely delayed the production of the television set. It was shown to the world for the first time at the New York City World's Fair in 1939, but World War II again disrupted the production of it. The first commercial television set was available in 1946 at the cost of about $375, and that was a lot of money. And what are you going to watch on the early programs? There was no ESPN, no networks. They were just developing. It took television only 13 years to reach the first 50 million users, 1/3 the time that it took radio. Fast forward to the 1990s, the internet was created. It took the internet only 4 years, only 4 years to reach the 50 million user mark. 1/3 the time of television and 1/10 the time of radio. Facebook was invented shortly, around 2001, took 3.5 years. Instagram, 6 months to reach the first 50 million users. The Angry Birds game, 35 days. If you remember, late November 2022, AI ChatGPT was developed. It took ChatGPT only 2 months to reach the first 100 million users. So let's presume it took a month to reach the first 50 million users, if that. Notice how these innovations are accelerating in terms of reaching a mass audience very quickly. How do we manage in the VUCA world? How do we meet volatility? Well, I think, and this might seem odd to say, but when you have as much volatility as we have, the need for planning and conceptualizing the future becomes even more important. Having a vision. So how do you meet volatility with a bold vision? BHAG's big, hairy, audacious goals matter and count more. You need a business plan for everything, whether you're starting a small business or running a business school. Obviously, it has to be agile. You have to make adjustments and refinements to it. You have to have environmental scans done periodically to make sure you're on the right course. But how do you meet a volatility? Through vision. You counter uncertainty with learning, listening, observing, and understanding. So how do you keep in touch with trends in your industry? What do you read every day? I read the Wall Street Journal. I read the local newspaper. I listen to news reports. I try to read various journals. I try to be a subject matter in what's happening in my industry, higher education, what's going on in executive education. I listen, observe, and understand. I do reviews of business schools to find out what they're doing, and like a sponge, I absorb some things into my own practices. So listening, observing, understanding, developing a professional network where you can have contacts of people in your industry and even beyond the industry to keep track of things, to do environmental scanning. We cope with the complexity by bringing as much clarity to what we do as possible. What I mean by this is we try to take complex problems and simplify them in a manner of, in a manner that helps us clarify what's going on. We try to take an abstract problem and simplify it, break it down into its elements so we can fully understand the complexity of the situation we're faced in. A good teacher takes complex material and gives clarity to it. Ambiguity calls for more wiggle room and agility. So we know that the world we live in is ambiguous. As we muddle our way through it, as we make our way through the world, we have to really be flexible and we have to be agile to meet the changing world that we're in. So ambiguity calls for agility. Maybe we'll be more motivated out here in higher education today with changes in athletics and changes in competition and the demographics. I feel like some industries like higher education are out on a cliff right now. So what's the marketplace 2025 look like in America? What are the most important age cohorts? Well, let's look at several of them. Millennials. Millennials were born from about 1981 to the mid-1990s, about 73 million of them. Since 2019, they became the largest age cohort, and they're making up the largest age cohort at work today. The youngest millennial is approaching 30, and the oldest one is in the mid-40s. Their traits: optimistic, team-oriented, inclusive, high-achieving, role followers, and talented in technology. They became digital natives very quickly. Millennials are striving to make an impact in the world. They're concerned about the values of the company they work for, not just making money. I'm a baby boomer. The baby boomers created a middle-age boom in America in the latter part of the 1900s. And now the baby boomers are really in their senior years, 61 to 79 years of age. Their traits are listed here, but reflect on the type of growth tremors this age cohort triggered in our society, in our various social institutions. You had so many babies being born in the late 1940s, throughout the 50s and the early 60s. It created a baby boom. Think about the impact on baby products, whether it be high chairs, cribs, Gerber, baby food, or even toys, the toy industry. Barbie doll was invented by Ruth Handler, and I think it was 1959. Great demographic timing. There were a lot of little girls who wanted to play with dolls back then. The 60s was the movement of, this group moved into their teenage years. They drove sports cars. The Mustang was developed by Lee Iacocca for Ford. I believe it was about 1964 the Mustang was developed. Became one of the most popular sports cars of all time. It was the first car that I bought on my own in 1974. It was a sporty car designed for young people. So young people, what do they like? They like driving sports cars. They liked listening to rock and roll. Think about the demographics of our movie and entertainment industry, record industry. The British invasion of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones came on the scene in the early 1960s. The Beatles came here, I think it was 1963, 64. Rolling Stones, the British invasion. In Detroit, there was Motown Records, creating bands like The Temptations, Smokey Robinson Miracles, The Supremes, Stevie Wonder, many, many others. So it was a great decade. The 60s was a great decade for music, sports cars, and blue jeans. And Woodstock was 1969. And it created growth tremors in higher education, as well as grade schools and high schools were flourishing during this period of time. In the 1970s, those hippies from the 1960s started moving into their family years. They had families, they were entering the workforce in large numbers, causing American productivity to suffer in the 1970s, but then rebound by the time they were middle-aged in the 1990s. Lee Iacocca, who created the Ford Mustang, he was around Chrysler in 1979. He created the ultimate family moving vehicle called the Chrysler minivan. Great demographic timing as we had a family boom. In the 1990s, these boomers were far along in their careers and starting to think about retirement. They were investing in the stock market, which helped drive the economy and growth in the 1990s. Now, what do those baby boomers now need as they approach their senior years, with 10,000 of us turning 65 years of age every day for most of the rest of this decade, if not all of the rest of this decade? What products do baby boomers need and want moving forward? And even they created a baby boomlet from 1987 to 1994 as baby boomers were having children that created another sort of a shorter baby boom. I don't want to forget about Gen Zs. Gen Zs were born from about 1996 through 2009, 2010. They were different from Gen Y in several important ways. What are the differences? One of the differences was that the Gen Zs are a bit more entrepreneurial. They also were born into a recession. They tend to be a pretty resilient bunch. They know that life's going to be hard, and they understand they'll get knocked down. They try to rise from getting knocked down, and they get up again. They're pretty resilient generation, and they learn how to navigate social media without embarrassing themselves. There are some differences. How can you prepare to lead Gen Z? How might they lead us? These are just questions for you to ponder. The racial ethnic diversity of America has changed. In 2005, going back 20 years ago, 2/3 of Americans were non-Hispanic whites, 14% Hispanic, 13% black, non-Hispanic black, and 5% Asian. 1 out of 8 were born outside the United States. What would that look like in 2050? Well, will there be a majority group? Not really. Whites will be still a majority, but only less than half the population. Non-Hispanic whites, 47%. Hispanics will go from over 50 million to 100 million at 29%. Asian, 9%. Blacks, 13%. Nearly 1 in 5 will have been born outside the United States. Right now, non-Hispanic blacks make up about 13% of the population. Asians about 5% of the population. Hispanics are around closing in on 20%, probably 18-19% of the population in 2025. We're definitely getting more diverse in terms of race and ethnicity. Here's the pie sort of right now, but this is a couple years old, so increase that Hispanic American ratio up to about 18%. And these are some Hispanic American consumers, not an homogenous group. Obviously they come from different Spanish-speaking countries in the Western Hemisphere, whether it be the Caribbean region, and even if they're coming from Cuba versus Puerto Rico, they're going to be different based on their cultural background. And people from South America, Central America, and Mexico. African American consumers. All these groups are becoming more affluent, also have more money to spend. Asian Americans. Probably the wealthiest subgroup here are Asian Americans in terms of family incomes. The Marketplace 2025, the Changing American Family. If you go back to the year of the first U.S. Census, 1790, the average family had almost 6 people living under a roof. That shrunk to about 3.4 people during the 1960s, but the baby boom was happening. By 1990, it was reduced to 2.7. Right now, it's sitting probably around 2.4, 2.3. The number of people living under one roof is declining. The traditional American family has shifted. In fact, I did see a statistic that only 26% of American families look like the typical American family. That means mom and dad and biologically connected kids living under one roof with that shaggy dog and that white picket fence. That's no longer that's how normal is that? There's all sorts of different family iterations of families today. You have unmarried people. Still about 2/3 of Americans will get married. Full nest 1, full nest 2, full nest 3, and empty nesters. Basically, a husband and wife whose kids have left the nest, forming their own households. And then we have the impact of more people are choosing to be single as well. I won't go through this, but there's been delayed marriages in this country. This might be a good time to talk about fertility rates around the world. The fertility rate is the average number of babies a woman has. In the United States right now, the fertility rate is around 1.66, which is below the natural replacement rate. The natural replacement rate by demographers is considered to be around 2.1. This means if you have a steady flow of immigrants and immigrants coming in, immigrants leaving, if you don't have a big influx or an outflux of people, to be able to replace people that pass away, you need a 2.1 ratio. We're below that here at 1.66, but we are still growing. Last time I checked, we're around 340 million people. We will reach 400 million people someday. Probably not in my lifetime, but I'm sure in your lifetime we'll reach 400 million people in America. So we're still growing, mostly because of immigration. And certain sectors, I mentioned Hispanic women are having babies at a higher rate than non-Hispanic women. So the fertility rates are a little below the replacement rate in the United States. In certain parts of the world, it's really become a critical factor impacting the future. Take South Korea, for example. South Koreans have the longest average work year. The number of hours the South Koreans work is somewhere in the mid-2000s. Now, the average working year in the United States, defined by hours, the average American, the average Japanese, German, American work around 1,800 hours. In France, it's around 1,400 hours. In South Korea, it's much higher, 2,400, 2,600 hours, something like that. In South Korea, they're not having babies, and the government views it as a crisis situation. The fertility rate in South Korea right now is 0.75. In large cities like Seoul, it's 0.58. And it's drastically low. And the concern is, well, they won't have younger workers for the future. Won't be able to staff their military. So they're trying to incentivize young couples to get married and have kids. And it's not working. For example, in the second largest city in Korea, a very affluent neighborhood, is having date nights. They have like speed dating. You get to meet people. And the way it works, I think you sit for a few minutes and have eye contact with someone. You strike up a conversation, see if there's chemistry there. If you decide to go on a date, the folks organizing the date, the dating routine, the dating regimen, they will give you $340 for a date. And if you get married, they will give you up to $14,000 to get married. They will give you a financial incentive to get married. That's how desperate they are to have people get married and have kids in Korea. $14,000. There's a company in Seoul, Korea, a big construction company. They'll give any employee that has a kid, they'll give them $75,000. It's amazing. Even church groups are paying people to have kids. If they have kids, they get like a baby bonus. And it's not working. And Hungary's doing the same thing. South Korea is not the only country doing this. And it's not working even in a place like Hungary. Eastern European countries are having this problem. Fertility rates are low in Europe. whether it be like Italy, Spain. In Spain, it's almost like down to one. The economies there in the southern nations of Europe, whether it be Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, those economies have struggled. And they're not having many babies. Where they're having the most babies are in some of the poorest countries in the world, some of the African countries, and they range up to 5 or 6, or even up to 7. The Middle Eastern countries, like the Gaza Strip, has a lot of babies, a lot of small children there. So the Middle Eastern countries still have very high birth rates, and fertility rates are normally 4 or 5. So that's a population sustainability is a big issue. Japan has had this going on for over a decade. They're losing 800,000 people a year. China, one of their drivers of the growth engine was a strong, population of young people. They're not having babies either. And the communist government is again trying to incentivize people to have babies there, just like the South Koreans are doing. So it's sort of a worldwide phenomenon. And people waiting longer to marry. In the United States now, the average age of a man getting married is around 28, for a woman 26. And it was, back in 1970s. In 1975, the average age of a man getting married was 23 and a half. Woman, 21. So it's changing a whole lot. It's changed a lot. Why are people waiting longer to get married? Well, it's probably due to economics, the fact that they go to college. It takes longer to get a start into careers, to launch a career. Some majors now, instead of taking just 4 years, they take 5, 6, 7, 8 years to be able to enter a profession. According to Forbes, as of 2022, 43% of households in America were childless. Late to marry, economics, low fertility rates explain the childless nature of not only our society, but societies around the world. My daughter-in-law said something very profound to me one day. She and my son have 2 dogs, no children yet, and she told me one day I was throwing a ball to one of their dogs, and I threw the ball near one of her sprawling plants, and the dog in her efforts to get the ball tore apart a large branch, and I got in trouble with this plant. And she said, "Don't you know, Randy, that our dogs are our children and our plants are our pets?" And so I had the dog damage one of her pets. It was kind of interesting. Today's households in America have more dogs than kids. Obviously, with the baby boomers moving into their senior years, they're causing a big growth tremor in products designed for older folks. Most industrialized countries, I mentioned China, Japan, South Korea, European countries are seeing the same trend. I think Cambria County, where I live, 25% of the people in the county are 65 and over. Overall for the country is about 1 in 5 now. Not everyone who's retired is wealthy, but we do have wolves, well-off older folks in the United States. Over 55 years of age control 3/4 of the country's total financial assets, and their discretionary income's rate of home ownership are the highest of all age groups. So why not target seniors and mine for silver, as they say? We also probably see this as the bipolarization of family incomes. We have more families that are affluent today, and also an increasing number of families struggling. Probably that explains why, the growth of Dollar General, Dollar Tree just spun off Family Dollar, Aldi's, those stores are very effective. Walmart going after that $30,000 less family income. And then also, Ruth Chris Steakhouse, Tiffany's, going after that more affluent customer. Whole Foods going after that more affluent customer. So I think Lester Throw says it best here. The $4 fast food meal is doing all right. The $150 dining experience is doing all right. It's the $20 meal that's in trouble. Lester Throw's a famous economist from MIT. This explains, we have this bipolar distribution of incomes. There are many families that have over $75,000 a year in income. The average price of a home in America right now is $462,000. Those folks are able to buy those $462,000 houses. They're able to buy a $60,000 vehicle. But we also have a lot of have-nots. And that's probably due to the structure of our economy. In the service industry, you have, service industry is rather manufacturing. The gap between the high earners and the low earners has gotten a lot larger. So, we hear these terms: boomerang kids leave the house, move back; no income kids with education; double income, no kids; 340 million Americans. We're the third most populated country on earth, behind India and China. And just recently, India surpassed China because India's population is expanding faster than China's. The core market thrust: millennials, baby boomers, and Gen Z, and seniors making up a lot of those baby boomers. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. Thanks for listening, and I hope you can navigate the VUCA world.